what the society was like before the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ received revelation, pre-Islamic Arabia, and the days of ignorance, the Ayyam al-Jahiliyyah, as the companions. And what we saw last week is how essentially depraved these people were, and how in need of a messenger that these individuals were. And we saw that there's individuals who would even do things like, when they couldn't find an actual idol to worship, they would go out in the field and they would start to make small mounds out of dirt and small mounds out of stones outside. Then they would do something like where they would grab a goat, they would milk the goat, and then they would pour the milk of the goat on top of that idol that they just created, and then start doing tawaf around the Kaaba. And then there's even some stories where they would say that later on, after they're done doing tawaf around the idol, they would see dogs would come to those mouths and they would drink the goat's milk that they left behind, and then they would even end up urinating on the idol. So just all these different things that we can see, and all these different weird practices that we saw from last week. And two observations that can be made from these practices is, well, the first one is that religion has been so deteriorated that this is how people would spiritually fulfill themselves, by doing tawaf around dirt. That's how low spirituality was at that point. But if you look past the surface, we see it and we think it's funny. You can also see the predicament of the common person at this time. That the worst spiritual condition a person can be in is when you have absolutely no motivation, you have absolutely no concern, you have no inclination towards any type of spirituality at all. This person is so far and distant from any type of iman where he doesn't even feel the need to pray to anything at all, doesn't feel the need to seek help from anything. They become arrogant. They forget about how to worship. They forget about why they are supposed to worship. And this person doesn't even feel the need to worship to begin with at all. This is the worst possible condition for a person in spiritual terms. But what we actually see here in the common person's condition, although so sad, although so lowly, that they would actually worship a bunch of dirt, at the end of the day, it shows that these people were desperate. It shows that they were looking for something. And the problem was that they didn't know exactly what they were looking for, and they didn't know how to look for it. But even though they didn't know, it didn't change the fact that they were somehow, some way, they were spiritually motivated. They had spirituality in them, but there was nobody there to guide them. There was nobody there to show them how to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala correctly. And then as we saw last week, that's when the human version of shaitan came, Abd ibn Luhay, and introduced idolatry to the Meccans. And so that's why today, if we apply something like this today, we see idol worship from back then and we laugh at it and we scoff at it. But the reality is idol worship exists today just in different forms. It just looks different. And that is why today we have to be very careful about presenting Islam as just a set of rules and laws, as motions without any connection to the spiritual fruit that is to submit to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because when it comes to spirituality and in Islam, it's enormous. It's vast. There's a lot of spiritual opportunity. And we have this sort of bare minimum set of rituals and things that we have to do. And even those, if you don't infuse them and imbue them with spirituality, with quality of taqwa, with awareness or awe, reverence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then it starts to feel worthless. We may be checking our boxes. We may be going through the motions. We may be doing the very, very bare minimum, but it's without love. It's without that true faith. And so when that happens, it's not going to be worth very much. So there's an ethical imperative in Islam to develop one's spirituality to the point where all of the worship that somebody does is infused with love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, with fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, with hope in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the other sort of aspect of spirituality, which is cited and founded in the hadith of Prophet Muhammad, which is a hadith Qudsi, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said that there's nothing more beloved to Allah than the fara'id, than the obligations. Okay, so that makes us realize that we're not supposed to put what? We're not supposed to put the cart before the horse.
That the fara'id, the obligations, are those things that we have to get involved in first, and then we go into the extra stuff. And those extra things should not be at the expense of the obligations. However, the next thing that he says is that after those were taken care of, the worshipper continues to draw closer to Allah with those extra things that aren't required, with the extra fasts, with the extra dhikr, the extra salah, all those extra things that are not required. And so when it comes to those extra things, they are more rather open-ended, right? Not in the sense that you can do whatever you want, but they're open-ended in the sense that there's a lot of room to grow and excel in them. That no matter how much fasting we do, we could do more. No matter how much dhikr we do, we could do more. No matter how much we pray, we could pray more. So obviously, the best dhikr is the dhikr of the Quran. And the best dhikr as well as the Quran is the dhikr of the Prophets of Allah alayhi salam. But the times and the situations in which one does dhikr, Aisha radiallahu anha has said that the Prophet ﷺ would make dhikr in every situation. And so there's a lot of room to grow. And this is why also another thing is we have to be very careful about presenting spirituality as something that is limited to a certain time and space. You'll often see this idea come about where people say that, oh, the Quran can't be recited at certain times. Or dhikr can only be recited at certain times, and this adhkar can only be recited here and not there, and this can be only recited here and there, and this dua cannot be recited at this time, at that time. Where does this come from? And one may argue when they say that, oh, but show me a hadith where the Prophet ﷺ said to make dua at this specific time that you're making dua in. Well, show me a hadith that he didn't. The burden of proof falls on you if you want to establish something to be haram. So this idea of Quran, dhikr, dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, one of the reasons why we're so void of spirituality today is because we have made it limited. We don't realize that these are things that are unlimited. It doesn't matter no matter what location, what time, what place you're in, you could always be doing these things. And it's when spirituality is developed by going above and beyond and filling up their lives and making their activity and their attention spirituality and the avenues towards that. Now, if we don't infuse our ibadah with spirituality, then what will happen is people will end up turning towards other means to feel their spirituality. So Aisha radiallahu anha, she said that the first verses that were revealed of the Quran, the first surahs that were revealed in the Quran, were those that were talking about spirituality. And had they been the verses that talk about staying away from zina or staying away from alcohol, then the companions would have never accepted Islam. But once someone develops so much love for Allah and His Messenger, then it becomes so easy to act in worship. It becomes so easy to enjoy the good and forbid the evil. And in reality, human beings were created to want to feel connected to something that is bigger than us. Which is why we see people today willing to wait hours upon hours in a line. Spend hundreds of dollars in order to what? Attend a concert of some celebrity who doesn't know them, who never will know them, who can never benefit them, and actually can only harm them. Because why? It makes them feel good. It makes them feel spiritual. It makes them feel connected to something bigger, a crowd. It's why these music festivals are so popular. It's why sports arenas are so popular. When you're together and you're all part of something bigger, it feels very powerful. And that is why if you ask someone that's gone to Hajj, they'll say it's arguably the most amazing spiritual experience. Because not only are you engaging in true spirituality, but you're doing it in a massive group. But then when we're asked to stand an hour and a half in Taraweeh, when we're asked to spend maybe $100 on a weekend-long workshop at the masjid, what happens? Our excuses begin to come out. Oh, this is too long. This is too expensive. Ilm should be free. Fi sabilillah or free sabilillah, right? Or I'll just watch it online, etc., etc., etc. One of the biggest lies that we have been told as kids and as adults growing up is that spirituality is a feeling. So what we ended up doing is we ended up chasing a feeling. This idea of ultimate enlightenment or some secret dhikr that's going to unlock a new world and I'm going to transcend this dunya. So what happens? People go to the imam or the sheikh and I ask, give me a specific dhikr to do. And all of them are going to probably respond with one, two, maybe like a handful of options. And you're always going to get the response of La ilaha illallah and Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad. Implement that into your life. And they'll be like, no, something unique. Everybody's doing that. I want something new. Something special. Right? Secret hadith that's locked up in some library in Morocco. No, but the reality is, ya habibi, the reason why everybody does it is because that is the best thing. That's why everybody prescribes it. That's why everybody does it. And really, that's what modern spirituality has become. Not so much in Islam, but I'm saying outside of Islam, it's everything that feels spiritual, but there's no discipline. And discipline is the key to spirituality. Our religion requires discipline. It requires us to say first no to the ego. So how do we taste the sweetness of dhikr? Somebody might be doing 1,000 La ilaha illallah a day, 1,000 Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad a day, but for some reason I can't taste the sweetness. Why? Right. So we're all chasing that sweetness of dhikr, but we fail to attain it because of two things. The first thing is because we are chasing a feeling rather than a relationship of submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the intention should be to build my connection with Allah, not to chase a feeling. And the fruit and sweetness of Iman will come as a gift of that. But even when it's not there, that should not influence or decrease our actions, because that's not why I'm doing it. Because now I have internalized La ilaha illallah. And by internalizing La ilaha illallah, what we're doing is when we say La ilaha illallah, we're saying that I submit myself to Allah. That I worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I fear none but Allah, and I love nobody more than Allah. I invoke only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and I depend only on Allah. I seek His forgiveness, I seek His help. I bow and I prostrate only to Allah. My unyielding obedience is reserved for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the second reason why we fail to attain the sweetness of Iman is that we fail to understand that 90% of the battle of tasting the sweetness of dhikr and the sweetness of Iman is by controlling the ego and stopping doing haram. If we look at haram, we listen to haram, we engage in haram, we buy haram, we sell haram, we have haram income, we cannot expect to appreciate the sweetness of dhikr. Take a bucket, for example. Right? The bucket represents a qalb. Now you have a bucket that is filled with mud. It's filled with dirt. And what happens is someone comes with a hose and puts the hose in the bucket and turns on the water. Now you have flowing water. What comes out of the bucket? The bucket begins to overflow. What comes out of the bucket? Dirty water. Dirty water comes out of the bucket. But the longer you let the water flow in there, eventually what happens? Pure water. But it's got to get the dirty water out first. The qalb is like that. Our hearts are filled with mud. It's filled with filth. It's filled with dirt. So when we're doing dhikr, the reason why we can't immediately taste the sweetness of Iman is because what's happening is we're first getting rid of all the filthy water. And we're getting to the point where we want to actually have pure water coming out of our hearts. But the reason why we have to stop doing, why I say 90% of the battle is stopping doing haram, because we can't keep throwing filth while the water is pouring. Otherwise, what's going to keep coming out? Filthy water. Right? This is the example of the qalb with dhikr. The dhikr is the water and the qalb is the bucket. Now, what's so beautiful about this sweetness of Iman is when you feel spirituality in your worship and you invoke Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and you infuse spirituality into your worship, you begin to feel hope. You begin to feel like you're part of a bigger purpose. Those who are oppressed begin to feel that now there's something greater out there. And that is why it's no coincidence why the da'wah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, why this idea of spirituality played a major role in his da'wah. In the initial stages of prophethood, the vast majority of people who were accepting Islam were from the lower parts of society. So you have people like Nuh alayhi salam, when he was, during his prophethood, the people would tell him, those who were the leaders of the people, they said, وَمَا نَرَاكَ اتَّبَعَكَ إِلَّا الَّذِينَ هُمْ أَرَاذِلُونَ. that we do not see anyone that follows you except those who are lowly amongst you. And even during the time of the Quraysh made a demand to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They said, "You're after us all the time. You want us to listen to you. You want us to believe in you. You want us to get on board with you and listen to this Islam. But the very first issue that we got is that you surround yourself with people that aren't that socially appealing. So it does not befit us as leaders of our tribe and as the wealthiest of most powerful men of Arabia to associate with these people." But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent Islam for the for that reason. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent Islam to uplift those who are oppressed, to uplift those who were called lowly amongst their people. So much so that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells the Prophet Muhammad in the Quran, وَاصْبِرْ نَفْسَكَ مَعَ الَّذِينَ يَدْعُونَ رَبَّهُمْ بِالْغَدَاةِ وَالْعَشِيِّ يُرِيدُونَ وَجْهَهُ. That tie yourself down to these people who remember Allah morning and evening. All they want in this life is to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَلَا تَعْدُ عَيْنَكَ عَنْهُمْ تُرِيدُ زِينَةَ الْحَيَاةِ الدُّنْيَا. And do not let your eyes be distracted by the other people. Right? Don't overlook these people, the individuals who you are supposed to have come for. Don't look straight through these people. Otherwise, you are just interested in the vanity and adornment and superficial material world of this life. وَلَا تُطِعْ مَنْ أَغْفَلْنَا قَلْبَهُ عَنْ ذِكْرِنَا وَاتَّبَعَ هَوَاهُ وَكَانَ أَمْرُهُ فُرُطًا. Do not follow these people whose hearts are devoid of the remembrance of Allah and follow their own desires, and even everything they do is in vain. So these people, they were very, very lost. They were very, very lost. The people of Quraysh and the Arabs before Revelation. But it did not change the fact that they were looking for an answer. And even today in our society and our dawah efforts, you will find people who bounce from church to church, from cult to cult, from religion to religion. And when you see someone keep bouncing around like that, it often means that their hearts are open for the truth, that their minds are searching for what is right. And they often end up accepting Islam. On the other hand, you also have people in life that live their life arrogantly. Their minds are not open. Their hearts are not open. They said, I have no need for spiritual attachment. I don't want to associate myself with organized religion. Organized religion is just to control people. It's for weak-minded people, etc., etc. Not realizing that everybody ends up in an organized religion. You either worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or if you succumb to your desires, then that means you just worship your desires. But you still end up worshiping something. But when you worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you actually free yourself from worshiping other than Allah and submitting to other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's the best liberation that can occur. But when a person is searching for the truth and reads the Quran, then their life is instantly changed. Right? This happened recently, alhamdulillah. There was I received a call from Harborview Medical. And there was a guy there. And they said that this guy wants to talk about Islam and we want you to come down. I was like, okay. I thought it was a Muslim guy. I thought it was a Muslim guy. So I go there. He had some type of leg injury. And I walk in the room and I see this guy, started talking to me, and he was like, yeah, I've been looking into Christianity. I looked into Buddhism for some time. I looked into Judaism. I looked into Hinduism. I started doing yoga. I went to the Himalayan mountains and I did this and that. And, for some reason, I'm not able to find what is the truth. And now I started searching into Islam and I had a few questions. And immediately I smiled because I knew by the end of the hour, this dude's going to be Muslim. Because his heart is open. His mind is open. And all I did was I had to sit there for 5 minutes and answer some questions, right? Showed him some excerpts in the Quran that related to his questions. And then by the end of the hour, he accepted Islam, right? وَلَكِنَ اللَّهَ يَهْدِي مَن يَشَاءُ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guides whom He wills. But when people are searching for the truth, they find the truth. So even with this widespread paganism that we see in pre-Islamic Arabia, there were a few people known as Al-Hunafa, right? Or Al-Hanif, plural of Hanif is Hunafa, who held the deen of Ibrahim alayhi salam. That's how they were categorized. These are individuals who held on to the deen of who? Ibrahim alayhi salam. And the word Hanif is a difficult word to translate. If you go look in the Quran in English translation, you'll see this word translated in maybe 6 or 7 different ways. There are many derivatives of this word Hanif and how the word was used by the ancient Arabs. One way is by saying the phrase Rajulun Ahnaf, right? There's this term, Rajulun Ahnaf, means someone who is pigeon-toed, right? So a normal person walks with their feet maybe pointed outwards. But someone who is pigeon-toed is someone who walks with their feet pointed slightly inwards, towards the center. So they say someone who is Rajul Ahnaf, it means he's always walking towards the middle. He's always walking towards the middle. For the Arabs in the room, what does Hanafiya mean? Right? Like a faucet, right? Water tap. This also comes from the word, right? Hanif. Because if you have imagine a huge water tank. We don't really have these in Seattle, but if you go to Texas, you'll see this massive water tank and it has the city name on it, like Arlington. If you have a water tap or a faucet and it has one faucet, you turn on the faucet, what happens is the water begins to streamline towards the middle. Right? So it focuses it streamlines it and focuses it into the middle. So a Hanif is someone who is constantly focused. They don't look left, they don't look right. They're focused and centered on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's why in the supplication of Ibrahim alayhi salam, one of the opening supplications in Salah is إِنِّي وَجَهْتُ وَجْهِي لِلَّذِي فَطَرَ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ حَنِيفًا وَمَا كَانَ مِنَ الْمُشْرِكِينَ. I have turned myself completely and wholeheartedly to the one who originated the heavens and the earth from nothingness. I am focused and I am centered on Allah. So there were perhaps a dozen of individuals who are from the Al-Hunafa. And the Quran and the Prophet ﷺ and even the pagan Arabs will call these people Al-Hunafa, which was ironic because these individuals received such a praiseworthy title, but were not, the Arabs were not comfortable with these people's beliefs. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses the word Hanif several times in Surah Al-Imran, for example. وَمَا كَانَ إِبْرَاهِيمُ يَهُودِيًّا وَلَا نَصْرَانِيًّا وَلَكِنْ كَانَ حَنِيفًا مُسْلِمًا وَمَا كَانَ مِنَ الْمُشْرِكِينَ. That Ibrahim alayhi salam was neither a Jew or a Christian, but he was one inclining towards truth, a Muslim, and he was not of the polytheists. قُلْ صَدَقَ اللَّهُ فَاتَّبِعُوا مِلَّةَ إِبْرَاهِيمَ حَنِيفًا وَمَا كَانَ مِنَ الْمُشْرِكِينَ. Say Allah has told the truth, so follow the religion of Ibrahim, inclining towards the truth, and he was not of the people who associate partners with Allah. So for the rest of today's session today, inshallah, we're going to talk about some individuals who were of the Hunafa, who were people of monotheism before Rasulullah ﷺ received his message. The first of them is Zayd ibn Amr ibn Nufayl. Asma bint Abi Bakr. So keep in mind at this time, the Christians have adopted Trinity, and Judaism have adopted something called rabbinical law, which is this idea that the Torah isn't the ultimate authority of law. Rather, the ultimate authority of law is the rabbis themselves. And the Torah is used for inspiration, which can cause problems because, as we see today, it can allow people to ignore some parts of their scripture and not ignore other parts of their scripture. So Asma bint Abi Bakr, radiallahu ta'ala anha, she narrated that Zayd ibn Amr ibn Nufayl was an eccentric, wise, elderly man who was respected amongst the Quraysh. One day he was sitting in the haram where the people would congregate. It was they're kind of like city hall. And so Zayd was leaning against the Kaaba and he was addressing the leaders of the Quraysh and he said, "O society of Quraysh, I swear by the one who has Zayd's life in his hands," meaning Allah. "None of you is truly upon the religion of Ibrahim except for myself." Right? This was before Rasulullah ﷺ received divine revelation. So Zayd ibn Amr, he would sit in the haram and he would make dua. And he says, "Oh Allah, if I knew of the most beloved way of worshipping you, I would worship you in that manner. That there is very little of your true message, so I don't know. and he would make sajda there. He would pray facing towards the Qibla. And so you would see the remnants of Ibrahim alayhi salam's religion amongst the Hunafa. Zayd would often say, Ilahi, Ilahi Ibrahim. Dini, Dini Ibrahim. That my God is the God of Ibrahim alayhi salam. My religion is the religion of Ibrahim alayhi salam. That's all I know. And so when true Iman exists, where any semblance of relationship of Allah is truly present in the hearts, it will obligate the person towards morality. And when spirituality is alive in a person at any level, then that person becomes more socially aware. That person will feel the need to be ethically and morally upright, just to be a good person. And do we find morality in people who aren't spiritually connected? Yes, sure, we will. But it's either going to be short-lived, it's going to be based on a specific idea, a specific agenda, or maybe a specific motive. But true selflessness and awareness of what it means to be good for the sake of being good can only come with a connection of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because now you're doing it for the sake of Allah, not for the sake of everybody else. So it's not going to come with conditions. And you're going to be good regardless of your situation.
Now even then we can find an unfortunate contradiction to that sentiment in our society. Where you can find a person who may be spiritual and devout, who prays a lot, who fasts a lot, who reads a lot of Quran, but for some reason they might not be the best person. Right? The kind of person definitely exists. But what that tells us is what they need to realize based on their social conduct and their akhlaq, or lack thereof, is that they obviously lack something in spirituality. So if I pray 5 times a day, but I'm still not a good person, I'm a horrible person when talking and dealing with people, and that means that I have the shell of prayer, but I don't truly pray. I fulfill the obligations of the 5 pillars, I go through the motions, I do qiyam, I do ruku', I do sujood. I flap my gums for 3 minutes, but I don't pray. Something is missing. I need to correct my prayer. So one of the practices of pre-Islamic society was to bury alive the firstborn child if it was a girl. Right? Now the elites did not do this because the women of the elite had more status than even the men in the lower class society. As we talked last week, there was an elite class and there was a lower class. There was no middle class in this society. You were either of the 1% or you were the 99%. And so, so this happened in many of the lower class society. That when their firstborn child was a girl, they would bury her alive as an offering to the gods. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed in Surah Al-Takwir, بِأَيِّ ذَنْبٍ قُتِلَتْ, that when the girl was buried alive, they will be asked, what wrong/sin could you have possibly done to deserve to be killed? But Zayd ibn Amr ibn Nufayl, the reason why he's such a special person,
even though he, was of the Hunafa before revelation, Zayd ibn Amr ibn Nufayl, what he would do is he would go around and make his best effort to prevent these girls from being buried alive. So if he heard a couple that has recently given birth to a firstborn daughter, and the parents were intending on killing the baby, Zayd would be the one to step in and tell the parents, you know what, listen, if you want no part of her, if you want no part of this girl, just hand her over to me. You can consider her dead. Just bring her over to me. I will take care of her. But just don't kill this innocent child. You won't have to ever see her again. Ever worry about her anymore. Right? So this is what Zayd would do. He would plead for the firstborn child daughters that were amongst the Arabs that were about to be buried alive for the sake of their gods. And then Zayd, what he would do is he would either find another family that's willing to take care of them, or if he couldn't, he would just take care of them himself. He would take care of them himself. So this is who Zayd ibn Amr ibn Nufayl was. Someone who strongly disapproved of shirk practices. He wouldn't participate in any festivals where any animals will be slaughtered in the name of the idols. He would say very beautifully, I do not eat from that which you sacrificed for your idols. Similarly, I do not eat except that which is sacrificed only in the name of Allah. So don't invite me to your idol worshipping parties. I have no interest in this. And he would say that this goat you are about to kill, Allah created it. Allah is the one who rains down water from the sky for this goat. Allah is the one that allowed vegetation to grow from the earth in order to feed this goat. Then after all of this process, you sacrifice the goat for someone other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Right? Zayd passed away before the Prophet received his message. However, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that Zayd ibn Amr ibn Nufayl, he will be resurrected on the Day of Judgment as an ummah by himself. Allahu Akbar, as an ummah by himself. As the ummah that existed between me and Isa ibn Maryam. And this is an odd some 500 to 600 years between Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and Isa alayhi salam. During the Isra wal Mi'raj, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when he entered Jannah, he saw two massive trees that were reserved for Zayd, right? And they're reserved for him to chill underneath in Jannah. Now Zayd, he actually met the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ before he received prophethood, but he passed away before the revelation. And Zayd was one of those who we have accounts to say that he predicted the prophethood of Rasulullah ﷺ. And this is a common theme with the Hunafa. Because they were informed about the religion of Ibrahim alayhi salam and there's a forthcoming prophet, they were educated about this. So they saw Rasulullah ﷺ and they knew this is going to be the guy. This is the one. The next one I'm going to talk about is Waraqah bin Nawfal, who is the paternal cousin of Khadija radiallahu anha, the beloved wife of Rasulullah ﷺ. Now Waraqah was another one of the Hunafa, right? He rejected idol worship and he believed in Tawheed. Him and Zayd ibn Amr were actually very close friends. And one day they went on a journey together to find the truth. They were travel buddies. They had a yearning to find what the true deen was. However, while traveling, some things happened and Zayd and Waraqah ended up going on different paths. Zayd was the one who came across Christianity and Judaism, but he wasn't comfortable with it, seeing the Trinity and rabbinical law. And so he just latched on to this idea of Millat Ibrahim, the way of Ibrahim alayhi salam. He latched onto this deen, that my deen is the deen of Ibrahim. This is what you wanted to do. This is what I'm going to stick to my guns about that. Now, on the other hand, Waraqah bin Nawfal, he came across certain monks who were practicing the Christianity of old. Right? And these monks were practicing a very slightly purer version of Christianity. So they secluded themselves from society because they weren't comfortable with the Trinity or the Son of God and all that business. So they practiced a cleaner form of Christianity that they could figure out for themselves. So Waraqah was actually one of the first people to translate the Injil, the Bible, or manuscripts of the Injil that they had into Arabic and bring it to the Hijaz. And he would make copies of the Injil and distribute to the people. Now Waraqah had little circles of people that he would try to preach to and bring them over from shirk to a purer form of Christianity. And so when the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ received the first revelation and he came home shaken up, where Khadija radiallahu anha comforted him, the first person she took to the Prophet was her cousin Waraqah bin Nawfal, who knew about the scriptures and the prophets. Now Waraqah at this time was very, very old when this happened. And he says if he speaks the truth, that this angel talks to him, then this would be the same angel that would come to Musa. And if he is sent out to preach this message by Allah, and I am still alive, I will fully support him. And I will help him in his message, and I will believe in him. And another narration, Waraqah bin Nawfal says, the Prophet says, I wish I was younger so that I can be amongst you on the day that your people are going to try to drive you out. Rasulullah asked, oh, my people that I love and they love me, they're going to try to cast me out? He says, yes, there's nobody that has come with a message like this except that they have been met with fierce opposition. And Waraqah stated that if he was alive, he would be there to help Rasulullah. And that is why the majority of scholars say that Waraqah bin Nawfal does count amongst the Sahaba. So we say radiyallahu an. Now the next Hanif that we're going to talk about is Qus ibn Sa'idah al-Iyadi. Now as the Prophet Muhammad's message became more widespread, there were caravans of tribes that began to accept Islam at the hands of the Prophet. One of those caravans belonged to the tribe of Iyad, or the Iyadi tribe. And the Prophet asked one of the members of the Iyadi tribe about Qus bin Sa'ida. And somebody said that he had passed away. And the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ began to remember a very old story when he was young. He said, I saw him one day at Ukad. There's like this place outside of Mecca where poetry festivals were annually held and idols would be worshipped. And I saw him there, and he was riding a red she-camel. And he was speaking some words that were very deep and astonishing. However, I don't remember what he was saying, but I just remember that his words were mind-blowing. And so one of the Iyadi people of the caravan, they said, I remember what Qus said. I was there too. He would say, oh, people gather together. Everyone who dies, then that person is gone. But every single thing will come back later, which is an expression, when we translate it from Arabic to English, doesn't make much sense. But essentially what it does actually mean is everything you do in this world has a follow-up or a consequence. The night is very deep and dark, and the sky is full of stars. But you also have the ocean that is raging with waves, stars that twinkle in the sky, mountains that are rooted deeply in the earth, and rivers that are flowing through the earth. So why is it that I see people that they go, but they don't come back? Did they become happy with where they had gone, so they stayed? Or they completely left the truth and fell asleep? I take an oath by Allah that verily for Allah there is a deen, and that deen that Allah has reserved is more pleasing to Allah than this deen that you are practicing. It was a very long speech that Qus bin Sa'ida would give at the poetry festivals. The next one is Umayyah ibn Abi as-Salat. Now the Prophet Muhammad said that Umayyah was very close to accepting Islam. So one thing you want to keep in mind is we did have Hunafa who believed in Tawheed, but when the message of Islam came and Rasulullah came, although they believed in Tawheed, they still had some arrogance in their heart that didn't let them accept Rasulullah as their messenger. One of those is Umayyah ibn Abi as-Salat. Umayyah was a Christian. And the Prophet Muhammad said Umayyah is very near to accepting Islam in his poetry, meaning that his poetry drips with Iman. And he wrote a lot of poetry about Tawheed. He did not believe in Isa alayhi salam's divinity or the Trinity. And he would also talk about the Day of Judgment, which was a pretty radical idea during pre-Islamic Arabia. They didn't believe in a Day of Judgment. And he was also known as one of the giants of poetry at the time. And when he was alive, the Prophet Muhammad did receive revelation, but he did not accept Islam out of arrogance. Now Umayyah was an elderly giant, and he was a master of poet of his time. So he thought that it would be beneath himself to accept the Prophet Muhammad's words because he was such high status. Now the scholars of the Quran believe that an ayah in Surah Al-A'raf refers to Umayyah ibn Abi Salat, which recites and relate upon them, O Muhammad, the story of the man whom we gave our signs. He could look at the sky and realize that there was something profound about it. He heard the Quran and he can recognize that there was something unique about it. We gave him these signs, but he retreated from it. He extracted himself out of that guidance. He ended up following shaitan, and he became one of those people who wander aimlessly throughout life. So this verse, many of the Mufassirun say that refers to Umayyah. Now Umayyah died in either the 2nd or 9th year of Hijrah. And what's interesting is although he never accepted Islam, there's actually a poem that he wrote that memorialized the deceased fighters of the Battle of Badr. So he would quote who were the people that died in the Battle of Badr, the good ones and the bad ones, and which side they were in, and their fate in the next life. He wrote this very beautiful poem about all of that, even though he himself never accepted Islam. The last one we're going to talk about is Labid ibn Rabi'a al-Amri. He was also one of those giants of poetry at the times of Jahiliyyah and received several distinctions. If it's not clear already from our previous classes and today, poetry mattered a lot to the Arabs. And this is crucial to understanding why the Quran is a miracle. Right? When we study the Arabic language and we see the literary miracle that the Quran is, That is why it was so inconceivable that someone could actually doubt the Quran. And we'll talk about that in future lessons, inshallah ta'ala. Now, his poems were amongst the al-mu'allaqat. Last week, if you guys remember, we talked about how they would have poetry competitions. They would literally have rap battles during Hajj, where they would have individuals come out and they would rap, and then the next person, somebody would win, and then the next person would move on, etc., 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 until there's a winner. And when there's that winner, that winner's poem would be hung up on the Kaaba. His poems would be hung up on the Kaaba. And Labid was one of those who received that honor multiple times, not just once. And so the Prophet Muhammad said some of the truest words that a poet has ever spoken were the words of Labid. And there's a very famous snippet from one of Labid's poems that till today, Islamic scholars use when talking about Allah with their students. You'll hear it if you ever, you'll hear it all the time in an academic and a classroom setting, where the scholars always say, "Ala kullu shay'in ma khala Allahu batilu." That, like Allah, like listen up, everybody, hear what I'm about to say. Kullu shay'in, every and each single thing, ma khala Allahu, other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, batil. It's batil. It's unstable. It's false. Now, in classical Arabic, haq, right, which is the opposite of batil, its root means something that is on solid foundation. Batil is the opposite. It's translated as a falsehood, but the actual literal translation or meaning of batil is something that is not established, something that has no foundation, and something that is not on established grounds. It's here today, it's gone tomorrow. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says in the Quran, in Surah Al-Rahman, كُلُّ مَنْ عَلَيْهَا فَانٍ وَيَبْقَى وَجْهُ رَبِّكَ ذُو الْجَلَالِ وَالْإِكْرَامِ, that every being on earth is bound to perish, and only your Lord Himself, full of majesty and honor, will remain forever. And so what we learn from this is that everything is only in existence for as long as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allows it to be in existence. Everything else, every possible way, every ideology, every ism, every other organization, whatever it may be, all of it is batil illallah. All of it is false except Allah, except Islam, except the Quran, except the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. This is all divine. This comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Anything else that does not come from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it might have some good in it sprinkled here and there, but it's never going to be on solid grounds because it's not divine. It is not divine. And so that is why we live our life completely in accordance to Islam. Not any other ideology, not any other political alliance, not any other ism, purely Islam. And so Labid lived to accept Islam. And he died during the Khilafah of Uthman ibn Affan radiallahu anhu. There's a few more Hunafa. There's Ka'b ibn Lu'ay ibn Ghalib al-Qurashi, who is the great-great-grandfather of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he was a practitioner of Tawheed and preached Tawheed in a predominantly shirk-based society. There's also Amr ibn Absa al-Sulami, who was one of the other Hunafa who ended up accepting Islam. And possibly the most obvious one, who by the majority of scholars is considered one of the Hunafa, is Abdul Muttalib, the grandfather of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who will basically, we're going to discuss his whole entire story next week, inshallah ta'ala, because that is an entire thing that needs to be covered on its own. And he's the one who, during the invasion of the elephants, Am al-Fil, Abdul Muttalib made it very clear that he was a very open advocate of Tawheed. And his legacy even lived on till much, much later. That during the Battle of Hunain, in the 8th year of Hijrah, there were a lot of new converts to Islam. And many of them were not established in their faith yet. And so the army at this Battle of Hunain, they started, when they were fighting with the opposition, they started to have a lot of trials. The opposition was really raining down on them. It was really tough. So the Muslims began to fall apart. They began to disperse. And at the time, the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, what he did to stop this and overcome and advance against the enemy is he rallied some of the long-term Sahaba and the Muslims, and he went into the battlefield and he started shouting a rallying cry, like a war cry. And the Prophet ﷺ, in the middle of the battlefield with other long-term Sahaba, loudly in the battlefield was saying what? Ana nabiyyu la kadhib. I am the Prophet and this is not a lie. Ana ibn Abdul Muttalib. I am the son, right, of Abdul Muttalib. And Abdul Muttalib had such reverence amongst the Arabs, such respect amongst the Arabs for being a very strong leader, that when he was saying this, it brought inspiration, motivation to the Arabs, and they ended up, winning. Inshallah, I think we can conclude here, inshallah. Next week, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about Abdul Muttalib. We're going to talk about the story of Zamzam, the history of Zamzam. So people, what's commonly misunderstood is that when when Hajar and Ismail alayhi salam, when they discovered the Zamzam water, there was a period of time where the Zamzam water actually ended up getting covered again. Because there was some corruption that happened and people started charging exuberant amount of money to take from the Zamzam water. So the Zamzam water ended up getting covered. And Abdul Muttalib was the one who actually rediscovered it before the birth of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. And that is the Zamzam that we have today. It's never been covered again. So Abdul Muttalib is the one who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave that honor, gave that blessing of being the person that rediscovered the Zamzam well. So we'll talk about that. We'll talk about the invasion of the elephants and the army of the elephants and why that is a very significant thing in Islamic history. And then we'll talk about the parents of Rasulullah ﷺ, and hopefully, if we can complete all of that, at the end of next week's session, we'll actually get into the birth of Rasulullah ﷺ himself, right? And everybody is like, when this is a Seerah class, when are we going to talk about Rasulullah ﷺ? This is important, I promise, as I mentioned before. Just all this background is going to, I promise, 100% make you fully appreciate the story of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Jazakallah khair. Is there any questions before we conclude today's class, inshallah? Yes. Is Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam considered as one of the Hunafa? Yes. Because so the Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decrees that he's going to be a prophet before even creation came about, right? So we won't lump him in with the Hunafa category. We actually put him with the prophets, right? But with that being said, the definition of Hunafa does apply to Rasulullah sallam, which is that he was on the deen of Ibrahim alayhi salam, which is Islam, in that sense. That makes sense. Yeah. Brothers? No? Anything else from the sisters? Going once, going twice. Okay. Good. Inshallah. Jazakallah khair, everyone. سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون والسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته